That's me, by the way, Gary Bartos. Echobatix is the name of my company. And does everybody know what this is? Have you seen this? Does anyone not know what this is? I should go the other route. You don't know what this is? No? No? Okay, bat sculpture near the Congress Avenue Bridge. Mexican free-tail bats. I'm big on bats, and so hence, bat is the name. And my friend who's still coming here is also big into bats, and she and I talk about bats a lot. So your company organization needs to have some kind of name, and so I just picked that. So this is being presented by Staple, Independent Media, any interest in comics. So Chris and Les and I, and we have an extended group of mutual friends, all met being basically part of the local art scene.
Yeah, Gary was here back in
99?
405 when we started the show. It was pretty instrumental in helping get it off the ground. So, pretty organized.
Yep. And obviously thanks to St. Edward's and Jeremy's walking around looking for my friend. Okay, so a little bit about me, which maybe you picked up. So and by calling myself an agitator, so I'm also going to be reading these things. Normally I don't like to put a lot of text on there, but my friend Lindsay is blind, so I actually have to say what's on the slide so she knows what's going on, even though she knows me. We've already talked about all this stuff. So I'm an agitator for usability. That's the nicest term I can come up with, so I can be kind of strident. If that means that makes it more memorable, I'll do that. I've gamified vision technology, so I am, like since 1995, I've been working in what most people nowadays call computer vision, but I'm actually in machine vision, which is a little different. And making games to demonstrate accessibility using smart glasses. We'll talk maybe a little bit about that. We can vote on it if we want to talk about that. And this T-shirt, I actually had this T-shirt I was wearing earlier. Caption your video. So I walk around. I'm a billboard for accessibility. If someone has a cool T-shirt or shirt, I will walk around with this. And this is my friend Ricky Pointer. She's a prominent deaf advocate. When they improved text-to-speech for the iPad, she was there with the CEO of Apple in this little intimate setting, and they're shooting it, Tim Cook, and I was like, I know who that is. So she had to, she called them craptions too, because for the longest time, captions, like especially automated captions, were really bad. Caption your videos means actually correct the automated captions, and I invent stuff. So when I live in Austin, I've mentioned this. I was one of the early Wikipedians. So 2003, when I was living in South Austin here, I wrote what was the 100,000th article ever in Wikipedia. So I'm that old. And I also grew up playing Pong. So this is what we're going to talk about. Like, what is accessible gaming? We're going to actually improve a game. So I'm going to be doing that same kind of thing going out there in the audience. And then the main thing, notice this is in bold, it's a different color. Right? Metrics. This is one thing I can impart to you. Other references you can find. There are people who are experts. Sorry, I'm also checking to see Lindsay's wandering around somewhere. She said we found it. What if Chris? Okay. Yeah.
I'll go with Chris.
Okay. Today's matter. So metrics. You can find other things from other people, like how to make audio interfaces. Yes, I've done it, but you can look up metrics is the new and unusual thing here. And then we're going to vote on a final topic. And depending on how much time and interest we have, we'll get into it. So this is not about video games. It is, but it's about video gaming, which is bigger than that. All right, and you'll see why. So I also think I think this presentation is going to be available to you. So you can take notes, and please do, but you can also just email me. But if you have any questions about it. But this is about gaming. That includes the social aspect. That includes how you feel about designing the game. It's a big part of life, frankly. We have work, we have love, and we have entertainment. Like whatever doesn't fit in those categories. Gaming is part of that. So I talk about this like, could someone, like my friend Lindsay here, could she get here on her own? Let's say if we were playing a game here and she couldn't get here on her own, that's inaccessible to her. That doesn't have anything to do with the design of the game. That's just getting to the spot. So in some manner of speaking, this is accessible and inaccessible. Saying anyone or everyone, accessible gaming means everyone. And so another term for that would be universal gaming. And by anyone, I mean literally anyone. So when I design tech for people who are blind and visually impaired, probably noticed I have strabismus, where my eyes turns out, that affects my depth perception. I also have double vision, amblyopia, and all these other things. And I design for people who are deafblind. Because if it works for someone who's deafblind, it'll work for someone who is hearing, it'll work for someone with more vision, and it actually just makes the overall design better. So that's an idea. I don't have a slide on this, but that I think of. If you design for accessibility, you are making it better for everyone. So especially when you get to be a little bit older age, like I have reading glasses, they're separate from our usual glasses. I'm finding small text and low contrast harder and harder to deal with. High contrast always works better. If you de-emphasize, if you make something lower contrast, that means it's not important and you're allowing people to overlook it, which is totally fine. But universal gaming, and I'll explain why as I get into how many people have this. So 1 in 6 people in the US have a disability. By disability, that means this is a legally recognized thing. The number is much higher than this. But could anyone say like the difference between a disability and impairment? Because right now, technically, by most standards, I do not have a disability. Even though there's certain things I really can't play baseball. Disability, impairment, any words mean you might know someone who might have a disability. Do you know the difference? Or would you hazard a guess versus not having one? I will point at people, by the way. I mean, Les, I know your name. What would be the difference here? Disability, like, why would it be 1 in 6? And what does that really correspond to?
Maybe a guess.
Yeah.
Making something difficult versus making it impossible.
Yeah. So it means like literally major life thing, like, can someone walk into this room or not at all? So there's a ramp that helps a lot of people. Can someone do certain kinds of work? If they can't, or if they need certain tools just to be able to do a job, which is fine because there are a lot of such tools, then they have a disability. If someone, for example, this isn't a disability, but I'll disclose, I have a sleep disorder, which I only became aware of a couple years ago. If I do not take medication and get to bed at a certain time, I'm so tired the next day that the day's, I wouldn't say it's lost, but it's hard for me to deal with it. So that's the thing. The fact that I can't, even though my family all played baseball for generations, I really can't because of depth perception. But I don't have a disability because I can drive reasonably well. Maybe stay behind me. I can do basically everything that I want to do, but I also kind of learned, and some of you may have experience like this, when you can't do something, you avoid it. So I have, at least according to the WHO, the World Health Organization, I have a contextual disability. Certain times it comes up where I will walk up to something and I'll stop because I can't tell if there's any depth to it. So, because I'm missing one of the depth cues. All right, 2 in 3 Americans, notice it doesn't give an age, play video games. 2 in 3. That includes people who are in their 80s. 1 in 6 people have a disability. 2 in 3 Americans play video games. Someone want to estimate how many people with disabilities play video games in the United States? Who's the mathiest person here? It's kind of a straightforward. Go ahead. You're raising your hand.
Is it like 15, 30%, somewhere in that range?
Yeah, so how many people is that in the U.S.? How many people live in the U.S.? Let's start there, roughly.
It's gonna
Yeah, right around 330, 340. Hello. Yeah.
is it like 50 million?
It's roughly, 40, 50, 60 million people play video games and have a disability. So you say, oh, that's a minority of people. It's like, it is a huge number. A small percentage of a large number is a large number of people. If your game, for example, were accessible to people who speak a different language, and it was culturally accessible, which I will get to that. I think of this broadly. Like, say, India, it's over 1 billion people. 1% of 1 billion people is a lot of people. You don't have to do the math. So consider how happy people will be if you design a game they can play. It's tens of millions of people, some fraction, some small percentage of that. If you capture a small percentage of that, and word will get around, by the way, then that is a huge number of people. They can be bigger than any other audience you're targeting, which is another reason to do that. So here's a question. So first, audience participation question. People with disabilities are A, not able to play video games, B, less likely, C, just as likely. People with disabilities are more likely to play video games. Show of hands, who thinks it's A? Anybody? How about B, less likely to play video games? Okay, raise them up high so we can, okay? How about just as likely? All right, how about more likely? It's these two. Anyone want to hazard a guess why? Go ahead.
It's one of
That's right. Because imagine if you have difficulty getting out because you have a limited mobility, like you're in a wheelchair. I actually have a cane. Anyways, another thing I have, but I'm not using it tonight. So it's easy enough for me to get out, but if I knew I had to walk a lot, and if it was a couple months ago, I was like, oh, I don't know. So if someone's in a wheelchair, and if they couldn't get to this space, they wouldn't do it. Similarly, if someone's playing a video game, and if the controller that they have to use, like if it was an arcade, okay, so it's kind of an old thing, but if you went in an arcade, and if they couldn't use the joystick, they're not going to play it. But then they find a game that they can play, and they'll just flock to it. So people talk about this like on Reddit, face to face. This is a game you can play, and then they'll start posting videos about it, TikTok, YouTube, and so on, and people will flock to it. And so I do know a lot of people, like take people who are blind, the employment rate of blind people, legally blind people in this country is 30%. Only 30% of blind people have jobs. Everyone else is on some kind of assistance or basically live with their family. Ours is the highest percentage anywhere in the world. There are countries like South Africa where only 1% of people who are blind have jobs. So a lot of people will take no independent trips outside of their home if they're blind. Again, I know more about this. People who are deaf are not actually going to play a game that requires, for instance, audio chat, hanging out. Everyone's just kind of, trash talking, whatever. If someone's deaf and there's no provisioning for captions, they're not going to play the game at all, but they'll find another game because this may be a way for them to socialize, right? So there are people who have socialization or basically social relations related disabilities. Through games, they may be able to play something that they wouldn't do in person. So if it's a video game, because we're going to be talking mostly about video games. So there are a lot of reasons. But yes, the main reason is this is something they can do. I do know a lot of people are home almost all the time. Okay, so considerations. I'm calling these considerations, even though I'm going to list what, from a website, CDC website, webpage, list them as disabilities. But again, there's disabilities. Impairment means doesn't quite reach a legal standard. Like I'm impaired, but for instance, I'm not on disability. I don't have technically one. And that's true. So vision, hearing, mental health, thinking, learning, movement, social relationships, communicating, remembering, chronic pain, which is often ignored. Who can mention a learning disability? It's actually the most common disability in the world. Yes. Can you say it louder? Autism, that's an interesting one because it covers a spectrum. Someone said it. Yes. No, it's true. No, it's fine. Anyone want to guess how many people in the world, you can either say a number or a fraction, have dyslexia? And I'm picking, it's the middle range of all the various estimates. Like one in how many or what number of people? Exactly correct. That's right in the middle of the scale. Lindsay, hello, you're late.
Hey, how's it going?
All right.
Good.
My friend Lindsay Ashley know who. One of the more famous blind people in the United States, by the way. So, you were on NPR not that long ago.
Oh, yeah, I was.
You were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was fun.
So, Les, you haven't met Les. He's off to your right if you want to sit next to him. Chris was sitting there.
Oh, okay, cool.
Or you can sit over there. You sit wherever you want.
Oh, I thought you said to my left.
I probably did, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Anyways, so that's dyslexia is possibly the most common disability in the world, partly because our brains aren't actually technically wired for written language. It's kind of a hack. How about communicating? What would be a disability related to communication? Notice some of these aren't called out as a specific disability, but it's just a class because there are many, many disabilities. What would be a disability related to communicating? Yeah, go ahead. Yes, unable to speak. There are people who are nonverbal, is the more common term these days. So that include people on the autism spectrum. So I have a friend's daughter is nonverbal. She uses an alternative communications device. All right. Social relationships, this gets back to. Autism is there. But can anyone else mention something that's related, that could be a disability that would affect social relationships? Or can affect social relationships in part because...
Immunocompromised?
Yes. Explain why, please.
Because if you're compromised, you can't go out and do things and meet people because you don't know where they've been, what you're touching, maybe get some of you, and what might take them 2 weeks to recover from could potentially end you.
Yes. So certainly we still see people walking around wearing masks. or not going out much, in which case you don't see them around. That's another thing. There are a lot of people, so there are invisible disabilities that we don't see, and then there's an invisible population of people we may not encounter because they're staying at home, and it's people being immunocompromised was something a lot more of us, including me, became more aware of during the pandemic and after. Pick one more. How many people here either have or know somebody who has suffered from chronic pain? Yeah. So how would that translate as a disability that's relevant to games, especially video games, like specifically video games? How might chronic pain be relevant? Anybody? You can just also shout it out. Yeah, go ahead.
Repetitive motion.
Tendonitis myself once. Lindsay, you look like you were about to say something. You can just blur it out.
Oh, no, not sp- I feel everything I keep having a thought about. No, I just, basically, but that was essentially to that effect.
Sure. Thinking. This is kind of a big category. Usually if people stop thinking, it's because they're no longer with us. Thinking-related disabilities. One we haven't mentioned yet. What might be? Go ahead.
ADHD.
Yes, ADHD. Also really, really common, possibly underdiagnosed to this day. Vision. Lindsay and I and some number of you. Does anyone know, roughly what percentage of people do not require correction for their vision or do not have any kind of vision impairment? What would you guess? 20%. Yeah, it's closer to 40, but the minority of people don't require correction. The majority, I'm somewhere in the middle, Lindsay's in there. The majority of people either have the vision impairment or require correction at the very least. In some countries it's much more obvious because everyone wears glasses. Contacts are less common. Okay, so here is the framing way to think about this. Whether you agree with this or not, or it makes sense to you or not, this is a way to frame your thinking about making games, is that accessibility is a right. It's a human right. It might seem weird. It's like, accessibility? Yes. Most people would agree you could talk to anybody in the world, just about, and you would come to the agreement that everybody has at least one life. Right? There may be very few other things we can agree on. I was like, you have at least one life. What is that? How do you treat someone based on that notion? Well, one of them is everyone's going to have rights. They have a right to their own life. What does that mean? Do they have a right to come here? Yes. Do they have a right, if I can, get a drink from Starbucks, do they have that right? Yes. I do actually invite people to, not now, but I do invite people to argue with me on this subject because I was like, it's not that I'm going to win, but I will strenuously fight for this notion, is because if you can't accept this, why would any rights make any sense at all? So accessibility is a right. That is a starting point for game design. This is entirely different to saying, I'm required to make something accessible. If you think of it as a right, it will literally change your thinking about the game that you're designing or that you're playing. And so what that means is universal accessibility. If it's a right, anyone want to give a definition of what a right is? I've just been kind of talking around it. It doesn't have to be a good definition, just what does having a right mean? Anybody? Or I'll point out someone. Yes, go ahead. In the red shirt, yes. Yes, you're wearing a red shirt.
I guess a right is just something you're entitled to.
Yeah, I would add a right is something you can generally act upon with impunity. You don't have to ask permission. There are a lot of gray areas, but a right is something that you have an authority as an individual person to act on at any time, right? You have a right to be alive. There's also responsibilities, and there's accountability that goes with it. Responsibility, accountability, authority. But that's right. And if everyone has this right, then we're talking about universal accessibility. Universal accessibility means everybody. It means all disabilities. You will not try to make your game accessible to everyone at once. That is insanely hard. It is really, really hard. Focus on one group. Improve your game for that one group. And I'll talk later about how you'll do that. And what we're shooting for, and I'm going to use two different words here, equitable experiences. So we have the word equity and we have the word equality. people debate the meanings of these words. I'm using, within the context of this, equitable means sort of like the same feeling or the same qualitative experience, right? Equal, especially since, I studied physics and I'm an engineer. Equal means numbers. This equals that, right? So if you're writing code for a game, you're also dealing with numbers. And when you're using equality or assignment operator or whatever you may be using in your programming language, that's where that comes in. Equitable is a felt thing. It's a experience that you can describe to someone else. Like, I'm so happy playing this. I'll give examples later where you can tell that someone had an equitable experience because of the way they reacted. So we honor the emotional reaction that people have to games. So that's what we're shooting for. And again, I will be using both words, and we're going to be focusing more on equality because this gets to metrics, which are numbers. So what I'm going to do now is, this is a quick sketch, and you'll see why this is a quick sketch. And again, I'm going to talk through this, so I'm going to describe what's on the screen. This is a touch screen game. Specifically, it's a touch screen. I do think of it as a mobile game. There are other touch screens, and I'm intentionally leaving aspects of the design out. And not just because I only spent 5-10 minutes drawing it, which is true. And then the goal here is to make it better. And I'll tell you right now, this is my way of approaching design, invention. I like to have a problem presented to me. I try to solve it myself without checking anyone else's work, without reading the research. Then I go back and read the research, which means I will literally go through a library and skim through every book on this one topic. In my case, it's Barker Engineering Library at MIT. It's not where I went to go, but as a member of the public, by the way. If you ever visit Boston, you can go to the engineering library. You can just walk in. They don't care. They're fine. They're happy with you being there. So we're going to make this game better. And the game that we're going to make better is Sound Pond. So what we have here, this big blue blob, is a top-down view of a pond. All right? And we have 3 green filled circles that are distributed randomly through the pond. And those represent turtles. You're looking down at turtles. And there is this red pair of concentric circles that represents a target. All right, that's all the visuals that I'm going to describe. So how do you play this game? Sorry, someone is calling me and hopes it's scam likely. I don't know anyone named scam likely. They call me all the time. They must be someone super important.
Person that calls me.
It's always the worst, yeah. So this is a touchscreen game. So there's a hand that is going to be moving up to, so there's a turtle at the upper right, at the upper left, and then just left of center, closer to the bottom. So there's a hand that's going to move towards the upper right first. Okay? And it's going to touch it, and when it touches it, I'm going to ask before I even show the next thing, how many people here are musicians and have a pretty good, yeah, I know you, Lindsay. I mean, may have you do this. Anyone else who like if I, you'll see why, or you'll hear why. Anyone else can, like, if I were to say bong, bong. Lindsay, why don't you repeat bong with the same pitch? And what note is it?
It's like kind of F-sharp. Yeah.
Thanks. I know I'm not on, but anyways.
Yeah, F-sharp. It's a...
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and normally it'd be bong. So you tap a turtle, and there's a sound. Like, you actually hear it through the speakers on your phone, your iPad, whatever it is, Android device. At the same time, there are these waves that are coming up in the water. So they're sound waves.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, so there are waves in the pond, just like if you drop a rock in the pond, right? And if you tapped a turtle, this does not hurt the turtles, then these waves would move outwards. And then you go to the next turtle. Oops. Pink. What's to be a major fifth here, Lindsay?
Wait, what is that?
What would be a major fifth, up, or if you want to go down for that matter, but flip it around. There you go. Okay. So we've got bong and ping, all right? Same thing. Now notice on the upper right, the waves have moved out farther. So this is very, very, very simple. Don't even really call it physical modeling, but there are waves moving through the water. So there's a timing aspect here. And down to the bottom, I can't, thong. So pick something else that would fit, fit a triad or, octave. So we have bong, ping, thong, right? These are, did it very monotone there. But there are 3 different tones, 3 different notes that make up a...
You could get, make it a little spicy and do some augmented.
You could.
You could do some, like, diminished or something.
You could do all kinds of funky things. In fact, that could be Lindsay's adding something to the game. So which is
Everyone
what?
always does the same, it's always kind of C major, there you go.
Yeah, but why do people like, for those of you who may know something about music, why do people like major chords and major scales? Does anyone know why? It's actually a long history, actually, because you have Greek books, Jeremy, you might.
They make you feel happy.
Yeah. Yeah. Like if you ever hear like a major thing then played as minor or vice versa, it completely messes songs up. So a sad song, someone who makes a major song is ridiculous. But there were theoreticians who would say, oh, I take this note, and then if I make the string half the length, which we now think of as an octave, that is the two notes being exactly the same, that's the most harmonious. The next one is their part by an octave, and they would keep dividing it up by fractions. And they would come up with these intervals and say, that's why, that's Western music. It's actually spun out of theory. And by Western, I'm specifically European. If we went down to African music, if we went into Asian music, and Indian has music, it's so many different varieties, it's really an enormous number, and you'll see that they don't use the same scales. My great uncle actually invented his own scale. He was also tone deaf, I should mention, but he invented his own scale, and why not? He was the guy who also named the transistor, by the way. So he was a strange man, but it's just cultural transmission. That's the only reason that we have these scales. All our music in the West, with some exceptions, comes down because some people in Greece decided, I think this sounds cool, and this is this theory behind it. It was taking a string and just dividing it up certain ways. Okay, so tapaturl in the upper right-hand corner, the waves there have moved out. They're almost at the target. The pane at the upper left turtle has also moved out, and someone just, me, tapped thumb. That is starting to move out. So the goal here is, will the waves from the turtles, again, moving up and down in the water and causing these waves in the water, will they arrive at the target at the same time? That's the goal, period. So this level. If they arrive at the target at the same time, you will hear a chord, possibly a whole orchestral chord, right? So that's the reward. If they don't arrive at the same time, and there's some allowance for not being perfectly correct, then you'll just hear them in order. So you do not succeed at this level. It could be put different ways. You don't succeed at this level. You don't pass the next level necessarily. And you try again. So it's timing. Tap the turtle, tap the turtle. You have to estimate the timing. So here are all these considerations. Movement, social relationships, impairments, disabilities, considerations, whatever. Remembering, hearing, communicating, chronic pain, thinking, learning, mental health, vision. When you pick one of those, and everybody's just going to do, not everyone's going to do one, but you can pick one of these and then tell me how you would improve the game. That includes adding something to the game. Or if you want to, for example, make sure that people who have to deal with something like social relationships in a way that's it's uncomfortable, or they need an alternate, you can add something in the game that doesn't exist. That's why this is an open-ended game that's so simple. I could actually do it in 30 seconds, but it took me however many minutes. So pick one of those, and then tell me how you would improve the game, or what this game lacks, if you're not sure how to improve it. Jeremy, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I'll take the easy one since I have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hearing.
Okay.
So then you need some kind of visual reward for the auditory reward that you were going to give for hitting these things, or some kind of communication, how to improve or something like that.
Yes, exactly. Les.
I don't know this might be more complicated or better. But in terms of tracking the movement, I assume that you're never going to get the first outer circle to hit at the same time if I'm touching them at multiple.
No, you won't.
So I'm looking for inner rings, right? If those could be different colors, or perhaps when you tapped it, it turned the whole thing colors, and then those alternated, so that I could see what's the next line coming.
Oh, nice. No one's ever mentioned that before. That's a good one. Who is that going to benefit?
If I had a hard time tracking movement.
Okay.
But honestly, but again, I'm not sure in terms of, I don't know anything about color blindness and what's more difficult or less difficult contrast-wise.
Red-green
I
is
don't
hard.
know if I would be making it more complicated and actually more difficult.
Not necessarily. Well, you mentioned color blindness. There's a slide on it later. There's another of the most common disabilities, and there are different kinds of color blindness. So there's color blindness, and there's also color deficiency, which is actually the most common, red-green. And also there's red and green here. The turtles are green. the target is red. These are opposite colors, complementary colors. Let's do like maybe 2 more. Yes.
I don't know what I would categorize it singularly,
Mm-hmm.
but also learning and thinking possibly some sort of haptic feedback.
Okay.
Mobile device, some sort of whether it's when you tap the initial turtles or whether the rings start to hit the target, some sort of physical feedback from the device that times out the sound cues.
Sure. So what adding haptics, what is that going to do for someone who has a learning or thinking related disability impairment or?
Just an additional,
Yep.
for me with ADHD, it's an additional like sensory input just
Yeah.
to like keep me on track or keep me focused
Yes.
on a task. It is like helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So it can have a different impact as well, which is that some people require, or basically everyone benefits from multimodal, like multisensory feedback. So the whole thing, Lindsay and I, the mutual friend who actually studied this, is that depending on what senses you have, if they're played simultaneously, if something, if you're sighted and hearing, and you can reach out and touch something, sight comes first, then hearing, and then haptics. Okay? If you don't have sight, then hearing comes first, typically. If someone's deafblind, then we're talking less and less, but they also have a sense of taste, typically. Fortunately, Stevie Wonder lost his sense of taste, which is an car accident in Detroit. So there is always a sense that's primary. We won't go into this, but in any detail, but they actually, if they're simultaneous, only one of them will come through and the others will be ignored.
Ooh, can I add to that too?
Yes.
Like one thing with being blind and thinking about these kinds of outputs is like, sometimes the whole thing with like typically you're dealing with multisensory information.
Yeah.
A lot of times, even if there is sound, there's kind of that expectation that you're using it with your vision.
Yeah.
So even if there's sound, it might not be like a very interesting sound,
Mhm.
but it might not even be a really useful sound, and if it is, it might just be kind of an afterthought sound.
Right.
So one thought I have, depending on the game, if it's meant to be really like what's the word, like bare bones, visually isn't that interesting to look at, it might make sense sonically for it to just be very simple.
Right.
But also, if it's supposed to be interesting, like, why are they turtles? Why aren't they just blobs? There's obviously something someone's getting out of seeing them and being like, oh, these are turtles. So to make it maybe a more engaging experience for blind people, really thinking, using audio cues that are like clean,
Yeah.
but interesting to hear. So kind of
Yeah.
not just, is the information coming across, but is this actually fun? And is the information like fun? Is it fun to listen to?
Yeah, like what would make it fun for you to listen to?
Oh, geez, like what, on this turtle game?
Sure.
I mean, maybe different kinds of water set, maybe like
Okay.
the turtle. I'm trying to think, because you want to make it confusing.
Right.
But maybe depending on how far away, maybe you have little ear cons where it's like
Audio icon, ear con.
ear
Yep.
cons, yeah. Yeah, like the sound might, you might get funny splashes, and you might
Right.
get like, I don't know if the turtle can talk or something, but just something like maybe sounds that would kind of make you giggle or make you kind of,
Yeah.
yeah.
Unusual. We remember unusual things, the von Restorff effect, talking about
Yeah,
before.
yeah.
Versus a useless sound, like hearing noise in the background like this, or like say every time I say something, every X word or something, I'm doing this. This is not a good sound. Take things to an extreme, see if they make sense. If they don't make sense to the extreme, they might not make sense anywhere along the spectrum.
That sound is very useful though if I'm going, oh, that's Gary's keys.
That's true. You
Or
actually,
like one key is a keychain with like a fob, and it sounds like a fob and maybe one key on it or two, as opposed to like,
what else might be on it? She gets this stuff right a lot.
I can't fully tell. It
Yeah.
doesn't sound like a giant key ring. It sounds like some kind of fob, like,
Uh-huh.
or maybe it's
Yep.
like a keychain, and it sounds like a key. I don't know. It could be
There's something like, there's a little miniature knife on there.
Oh, okay.
So
makes
that's the
sense.
plasticky sound.
Oh, you got that too?
Yeah. So we have a mutual friend, Matt Schifrin, the guy who made Lego print Lego build instructions in Braille. The one guy in the world who did that is a mutual friend of ours out of Boston. And he's a professional musician, both as a singer and an instrumentalist. But he can't hear things the way Lindsay does.
Oh, really?
No, he can't. I mean, you know, he really good pitch and everything, but he doesn't do this kind of stuff. So anyways, we covered enough things there. What's that?
One more quick thing.
Yeah,
Like,
he's-
one other thing with like the whole
Good.
dissonance.
Yep.
Like, I can appreciate that too, because one thing I noticed with my sort of thing I've discovered, it's kind of a bias when I think about accessibility.
Yeah.
But everyone wants to make, when they make things like accessible for blind people, everyone thinks like, oh, warm and fuzzy and nice and like feel good. Like it's always kind of like that. But sometimes you want like the weird, you know, you want like the weird, bizarre sounds. Like you want those kinds of experiences that, you know, not just any old video game, but something that's kind of, you know, depending on what you're going for everybody else. Like,
Yeah.
you know, blind people want like a whole range of different different games.
Yeah. Do not think of coddling or condescending to people with disabilities. Yeah.
Dumb it down.
Yeah.
You know.
Make a horror game.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a big thing.
I totally wanna, oh yeah, I definitely want that.
That's actually, at least in terms of game developers who came to Boston Game Loop, one of the biggest draws. And people spent just like 15 minutes talking about horror games they played, where I was writing this stuff down furiously. I was like, I hadn't heard of any of these games. And people were like, oh, have you played this? Play this. And it was like pages of horror games. It's popular in the same way that horror movies are popular for perhaps different reasons. Okay, that's enough stuff. So one thing you could think about here is if you have a disability, you know someone with a disability, there's one you want to focus on in the context of, say, this game or your own game, you just pick one, right? Focus on that for a while. You want to develop some depth in a certain kind of accessibility before you go for breadth. Breadth is very hard because you actually need either to find another person who has depth or you have to gain depth, and that's going to take years and years and years. There isn't anyone I know who actually covers them all well. So you have to, this is one of the reasons I do this, is like each one of you may pick something different. Okay, so here's the key question. So you came up with these ideas to improve it. How would you actually know it's right? How would you know that you've improved the game? Not guess. Know. Go ahead. Play. Okay. Go on. You got play touch, so they just show up and it's better? Or? Sorry, I didn't mean that to be mean.
Like what, for whatever you're trying to tackle with
Yeah.
accessibility, get someone that falls under that like umbrella
Mm-hmm.
and get them to test the game, see if it's pleasing for them.
Sure.
If not, then ask if there's something we can do better for it or if we can change it.
Yes. This is absolutely the first step. Find somebody. Just talk to them. You know, Lindsay and I met coincidentally because I was going to see someone else. We were just talking about this last night that she was working with, and she sat across a desk from. And then we realized, like, we really hit it off easily, and we became friends very quickly. And it was so, you know, it was going for work and ended up making a friend. But you could, again, if you're addressing a particular disability, or if you have a disability, and you're like, you know what, I want to make a game that works better for me. You're not designing the game for yourself exactly. You were designing for other people who have a disability or impairment or some other consideration you're trying to address. Find groups where those people congregate. Group could be as small as one other person and you, but you just get talking with people, all right? So I'm going to introduce there are 5 different ways to do this, and you need them all. Most people think of accessibility as just one thing, and once I achieve that, I made a game accessible. That is not true. So as a review, accessibility is a right. Again, this is the framing mechanism we have for this. We're going for universal accessibility, which spins right out of it being a right. And we want an equitable experience for all players. So there are 5 types of, now I'm switching to equality, so it gets numeric. Although it won't be immediately obvious necessarily. Equal social accessibility, right? So that means people can actually meet in the same place to play a game. And to take a particular example, I mentioned it, or I touched on it earlier. Imagine someone is deaf and they know American Sign Language. We have Texas School for the Deaf just, a couple miles from here, right? Imagine you had a friend there You invite them to a game night, either in a particular location or you're meeting online, and they're the only person who is nonverbal. They know ASL, all sorts of things. They could be funny. They could be great to chat with. My friend Ricky from the previous, she's hilarious. I mean, she's funnier when it's just a private call than when she's doing public things. You can imagine what that means. She's just really, really funny. And, but, you know, I have captions turned on in Zoom so we can go back and forth. Yes, you can read lips. Anyone know what percentage of lip reading actually works for someone who can read lips, someone who's deaf? Anyone ever heard the statistic?
I believe it's 25%.
Yeah, it's as high as, it never gets above 50. So the whole, someone's, you know, in a movie or something, you see someone reading lips, is like, yeah, that is not a thing. That is totally false. So it's low. They can get the sense of something. It's like if you've learned a semester's worth or maybe a year's worth of a foreign language, which effectively it is, you'll get the sense of something. Like I can get the sense of something in Cantonese because I recognize a few words, especially if they're related to food, you know, or numbers, which doesn't cover a lot, but it doesn't necessarily mean I can follow the conversation exactly. I just get hints of it. So social accessibility, this really speaks to people who have significant anxiety, communications. If someone is on the autism spectrum, it may be difficult for them to be around a lot of people, right? How would you make something accessible to them? Price. So the example I'm going to use here, right, there are two examples. Are prices equal for everybody? And this is weird to think in terms of video games. The answer is absolutely not. If someone needs a controller with extended joysticks, they have to pay extra to play your game. You might say, oh, they're playing other games too. It's like, yes, they might play 10. So 10% of the money they spent on this expensive, unusual controller that only a few companies make, it might be 2, that has to be amortized, basically spread across the number of games they're playing. They're actually paying extra to play games. That means they're paying extra to play your game. Unless you do something that mitigates that. Another example, and one that Lindsay's my friend, mutual friend Matt, who Chris also knows, talks about, is the game of Catan. It's a board games. And okay, can anyone say, like, let's say in Austin, if you were to buy this board game in the box, brand new, just the base game, Catan, how much it would cost in the store?
I'm gonna guess $50.
It's about 40, $50.
Yeah, somewhere around there. There is a Braille version for people who won't go into, well, maybe I will go into statistics there later, but there is a Braille version of Catan, which came years later, because Braille things always are delayed. Lindsay, do you know how much that costs?
No idea.
$150. It's 3 times as expensive. And there's only one company that makes it, 64-ounce games. They're great. I've emailed them. It's a nice married couple who, they're the company, right? So they made a game, but it costs 3 times as much because it's expensive to make it in such small quantities. The small quantities are, they're only, to do the statistics, only about 150,000 people in the United States who read Braille. People think everyone who's blind read Braille. Absolutely not true. 10% blind people, which is roughly 1% of any population. So most people who are blind don't actually know Braille, which you can imagine what the impact that is, on their lives and their ability to get an education and work and so on.
Just for those who do read it, like for those of us who do,
Yeah.
super, super important. It's like a
Yeah.
really important like skill and thing that we use.
Yeah.
But also like what Gary's talking, like we're only talking about the costs for video game related parts of life, and this is on top of like all the other costs of everything else that So you have this remote, this controller that's this much. You have all this for video games on top of just all the things to get other stuff done in life. So it really adds up.
Well, I got more. So yeah, Braille it's not a language, it's a writing system. And people who know Braille are employed at much higher rates. And the weird thing is that this is an example of sighted people not thinking through what's actually good, which is that schools, like 70s, 80s, especially the 90s, a lot of students who had some usable vision would be mainstreamed. And they're like, oh, okay, we want them in with other students. Okay, so there's a social good there that Okay, you're mixing with people that you're going to see out in the street. By the way, you can use the word see. It's part of our English language. You don't have to worry about not using the word see with someone who's blind. But what would happen is someone would be the blind kid in school. That was Lindsay. Yeah. And Lindsay did well. Not everyone's going to do well in that scenario. And so a lot of kids who would have benefited from learning Braille didn't learn Braille. They were never taught it. And there aren't that many people who teach Braille. So this is one of the things that leads to this lack. So if they knew Braille, they could at least pay $150 to play Catan. But if they're legally blind and they don't know Braille, they probably can't play it at all. So that is an infinite price. There's no price that'll make it accessible to you. All right, next one is equal load. This has to do with cognitive load, but I'm calling it mental and physical, or another way to think of it is labor. Does it take the same amount of effort? So people have limited mobility, limited use of their hands. It is harder for them to pick up dice. It is harder for them to use a controller, right? It is harder for them to press buttons, so it is not equal for them. So when there's a barrier like that, that limits the number of people who are going to play. What can you do about that? All right, actions. That means tasks. Defeat the big boss, find the treasure, click on this pixel, whatever. That's an action, right? I picked the word for a certain reason. You'll see in a moment. Social accessibility, price to play, load, actions, and time. And this is probably the hardest one to achieve. Can Lindsay and I play the same game, and can she complete the same action in the same amount of time? Right? So, like, if I were to pick something and say, "Hey, find someone in the red shirt," how long is it going to take Lindsay to do that? Because that could be a game. How many people are wearing a red shirt? How many people are wearing a yellow jacket? You know, how long would it take Lindsay to figure that out?
Just point at random people like,
You. And then it becomes the whole, yeah. There are two guards at the gate. One of them always says the truth and always, et cetera. Always tells a lie. So how do you ask one question to determine which is which? So, and I have an example later on for time. So equal social accessibility, equal price to play, equal load or labor, equal actions, equal time. This is what we're shooting for. This is what you can measure. SPLAT, SPLAT. If you remember nothing else, SPLAT, right? Social, price, load, actions, time. 5 types of accessibility. There may be a 6th one. I don't know. But these, if you cover these and you measure these, which we'll talk about how to measure, then you have considered a lot of different types of accessibility from a lot of different angles. So you could study one in particular, the economics of it. How do you make it more economical? Price, right? Some people do focus on the load. Most people deal with actions. Their only thing is like, well, if someone can play this game, like someone's blind and there is an audio interface, they think literally this is accessibility. It's just the actions, and it's not. If someone's deaf and they don't get the audio cue at the end, it's like, well, I just add that. That is important. That is an improvement. That is not the whole deal. Can they then talk about what they did in the chat feature, for example, or not, like if it's an audio chat? SPLAT. All right.
That's the audio,
Yes.
those are the audio bits for games.
Yes. So that's one of the aspects. This also has a comic book reference, which is why it's in a comic booky kind of font. So 5 measures or types of equality or inequality. It's on a scale from 0 to 1, 0% to 100%. And I'm going to tell you right now, what will be probably most disappointing is there is no way you can measure those 5 things from this scale that'll work for every game. You have to figure out what it is for your game. That's where play testing comes in. And we'll explain a few particular examples, or I'll explain and we'll talk about. So you have to figure out what 1 is. That means basically if you have people who do not have the particular disability or impairment that you're testing for, they are going to be defining the 1 end of the scale. And then you're going to have a separate group in your play testing of the people who have the particular disability, impairment, or other consideration, and then you're going to measure a difference. That's what you're looking at. It is statistics, you're going to get 2 different distributions. You want to see the raw data, not just what I'm going to talk about next. But that's what you're looking for. You have to do it per game because your game, hopefully, is a little different from every other game. Just a little something different. So therefore, there is no one thing. Like, I can mention is like, oh, this would be for, I don't really know even what this term means because I did not play the game when I was around. Roguelike games, how many people know what a roguelike game is? Thank you, that's more people than me. or you know more than me. So, but I just know that's a kind of game. First-person shooters, side-scrollers, strategy games, puzzle games, right? Each one of these would have different measures here. So there's no way to summarize this quickly. I'm just trying to get the idea across where you can run with it, you can improve it, you can change it, I don't care. Use this yourself. It'd be nice if you credited me and my friends, but the more important thing is like you actually use this, all right? So the way you come up with this metric, so I'll ask, depending on how many of you may have had statistics, how mathy you are, so the metric for social or price or load or actions or time is the median of one group divided by the median of another group. Who here knows the difference between a median and an average and why you would use one instead of the other?
Average is all of the numbers added together and divided by the total amount of answers.
Yep.
Median is just straight down the middle,
Yeah.
whichever one is at the high end. Yeah, it's just the most common, or not the most common, it's the answer that's most in the middle of all the numbers.
Yes, exactly. In the middle, you sort the numbers, right? And then there's the one in the middle. If you have an even number, you just pick one, or you take the average between the two middle. So why would you use median, the most common? Where another way to think of median, it's in the middle. Half of the people would have a score above this number. Half the people would have a score below this number. Why would you pick that instead of average? For example, I will just pose this. When you hear people, especially economists who have a certain mindset, talk about average income in this country, why do they use average instead of median? I mean, why? And this is talking over a huge, I mean, this is over 300 million people, right? So you'd think if it was a distribution, the way we taught that these things happens in large numbers, the law of large numbers, these two numbers should actually be really close, but they're not, in fact, remotely close.
It skews the data depending on like what the higher or lower outcome
Yeah,
is taking over that.
sure. Yeah, because I would pose a question. How many people here are billionaires? Any billionaires in the audience? Okay. If one billionaire walked in this room, and let's assume for the moment all you have jobs, I mean, being a student is a job, but if a billionaire walked in and said, let's find the average income. Doesn't everyone feel great about the average income? That's an average. The difference between, I'm trying to remember, the difference between the average income in the United States and the median income is like tens of thousands of dollars, because it's skewed by a very small group of very wealthy people who have income that's counted in different ways than any one of us here. It's like, there's a paycheck or something. So this is the way, so median is more fair. You know that you're in the middle of the scale, right? Half above, half below. You might want to favor, you might say, like the 3/4 point, the third quartile. But median is something where it's easy to measure, it's easy to understand, go for easy, easy, easy. There's several steps here, but you'll end up with something that goes necessarily from 0 to 1. Because the best you can do is the two things are equal, and the worst you can do is the one on the top is 0. Like if someone can't do something at all, like they simply can't afford something, it doesn't matter that it's $10 too expensive, it is impossibly expensive. That's a 0 for that group, for the median. All right, so here's some examples of SPLAT metrics. Actions, this is in a different order. 0.0 would be text on screen that can't be read by a group or by Lindsay or other people or with people with significant dyslexia. If someone can't read the text on the screen, your game depends on the text on that screen, there are certain actions for which accessibility will be 0, identically 0. Not 0.01, 0. Right? Price, someone needs to buy a special controller. Like if you go to a big gaming convention, you'll see there'll be a couple booths or people selling game controllers with extensions because someone can't get their thumbs all the way down, or it just makes it easier for them to use, or they don't have to move it as far to move the joystick left, down, up, right. Some people get bigger phones because it's easier on their hands. If someone has to pay extra to play games, that's non-equality of price. So these controllers could be really expensive. I'm picking an example. If it is 5 times as much total expense, because some people use special switches, they'll control with a foot, they'll move something with their hand, they might use a tongue, talking about a lot of different mobility limitations. So that would give you a score of 1/5, which is 0.2, which is low. That's bad. The Catan example, it's roughly, it'll get around 0.3, because the Braille version, $150 versus the $50 less. That's a low score on price. Time, someone needs 2.5 times longer to touch one of the turtles in Sound Pond. That's 0.4. So that's not the worst thing. That could be, if this is the first game they could play that's like this, they might be happy. That gets to the equitable experience. You still have to measure what this is. Because if you can measure something, you can tell where it gets better. If you don't measure something, I can say this from decades of experience designing stuff, you can easily convince yourself and everyone else that things are getting better when they're not. The only way you can tell is it has to be someone else testing it. You have to write down what you expect. You have to measure everything, and then you have to go back and do the same thing again. And if you have to bring someone else in to run the test, do that so that you don't bias it. So you want to give yourself as the developer the hardest time. If you have chat in your game and you have 2 different groups, let's say group A has people with either a disorder or a disability or just difficulty socializing, and only half the people in that group use in-game chat. It could be text, it could be audio, whatever. It could be video, Compared to group B, then that rate's at 0.5, right? Doesn't mean everybody in group B does it, but let's say it's 8 out of 10 group B, but only 4 out of 10 group A. That's a 0.5. Is this going to be statistically significant until you get to 20, 30? Statisticians will argue no. I say yes. I've seen it proven time and time again. Is that when you deal with people and you start to notice these trends, you don't need that many people. Yes, more is better generally, because you'll have conversations after your play test. You'll talk to people. You'll find out someone did well, but there's this other little thing that you need to know. So measure, but also have these conversations, right? You can do surveys. I think the QR code at the end leads to what I think is the best survey book on surveys, and actually the only good one is the Survey Playbook by Matthew Champagne, who's also on LinkedIn, by the way, and easy to talk to. It's really short, and he tells you how to design surveys, and basically everyone designs surveys wrong. He's very, very good at explaining why they're wrong, because you read it and you're like, oh, that's why you don't ask for personal information first, because A, it's intrusive, B, you can add it at the end, and C, people don't know what you're asking for or why you're asking, that sort of thing. The last one is if you have equal mental effort for all groups, then you get a 1. How you achieve that in your game, first-person shooter, Sound Pond, whatever, that's going to be game dependent. All right.
Well, also, like, when you have people play test your game, I mean, if you're looking for people with, certain disabilities, or, certain experiences, that kind of thing, isn't it, like, I mean, when I'm thinking about it, I would think it's important to also consider what kind of people, like, what people you are designing this game for.
Yes.
So not just like, oh, I get a blind person to play my game, but
Yes.
okay, if it's a game, if it's a horror game and you're like chopping people's heads off, and you get a blind person testing the game and they're like not into horror games and they're like appalled by the idea of chopping people's heads off in a video game, you're going to get a very different, they're possibly going to get a very different response because perhaps this isn't the person that you know, attending the game.
The audience.
Yeah.
Yes. Making notes to add that to the next time I give a presentation. Thanks, it's just not in here. I have other variants, like later if you want to chat a bit. I have dice. A lot of usability principles can be demonstrated with dice. So those are just some examples. And this is a key point. It's like you have your audience. People play this game. People play strategy games. I like puzzle games, a lot of word games and so forth. It's just the way it's always been. When it comes to the play testing, right? Here's a book. Yes. Yes. Professor Bryant adds this book. This is the 4th edition. It's very nice. I will be giving feedback when I finish it. Another professor here, Jeremy, is mentioned in the book at the beginning, thanks to, modest. But,
By the way,
yeah.
I know this is between us, but that game that I have the fuzzy critter for that I
Yes.
it's on
Oh,
Hulu, yeah.
I like this. So this is a game. The game on the cover is essentially it's like it's a tilted view of a board with squares, which nowadays we know a lot of hexagons, Catan being one of them. And there are game pieces that stand up as if they were. Wait, these are real? That is a video game, right? But they're standing up as if they were stand-up cardboard things that you would have in a traditional board game, which is a very cool design aesthetic.
Yeah,
Also a good point. Make your game easy for yourself. I have done miserably hard things with friends who were, for 90% of our development, also miserable, and then we finally finished it. And as a friend of mine, late friend of mine said the best thing about developing new things was that you get to talk about it afterwards. It's not the intermediate, like people are arguing and you're under pressure and all that. All right, so this is a book to flip to a page, random page. Give and take. If you've been paying close attention up to this point of this book, which you haven't because you haven't read it yet, and you should have as an aspiring or working game tester. So this is a super specific book. You would have noticed an apparent contradiction between the testing approach to counteract panic, do not treat this build like it was the last one, and the trust no one approach. If you've ever been with testers, this is a very common thing. There are books on software testing in general. And then he goes into a sports analogy about baseball, is there's a lot of pressure on testers. They are not typically viewed as the stars of development in any software. They're often viewed as like, oh, and then there's this person. Oh, we got to give it to testing. And people say, oh, we're going to develop until like a week before release that we already promised. And then you throw it over the wall to the testers. And it should actually be like development 50%, maybe only 10%. And the rest is testing, iteration, and talking to people. Do not spend 90% of your time developing. It's a little different in school, but when you get out in the world, do not assume that you will spend most of your time developing. That is not the way development actually works. You're in a team, and testing is absolutely critical. If you don't, I'll give you this analogy. If, just to pick a random thing, you are creating software that uses a lot of the same technology, frankly, that you will see in video games that runs on GPU cards, right? And you are making a thing that runs in a factory that builds, say, cars, right? Average car price nowadays is $45,000. So if a factory doesn't make a car, they lose $45,000. And they make a car every minute of every weekday, sometimes 7 days a week. So when your vision system, I'm now going to point at myself, shuts down a production line for minutes or hours, they are losing, and they think you should lose $45,000 a minute. So that's a fair amount of pressure. And once in a while, put yourself in, don't stress yourself out, put yourself in a position where you're going to test, how quickly can I do this? Or who is going to be the most stringent, tester or player, and push back and just experience what that's like. Because, for instance, I can type code in Notepad because I had to do that kind of thing, where there wasn't time to compile it, look for bugs. I had to compile it, get it running, and then the production line started. There was no time to test stuff. So I just got used to writing code a certain way. I'm not saying it's a better way. That was a very specific thing. But it's something, put yourself in that position. If you have difficulty timing things, give yourself half the time that you think you actually need. And then stick with it. All right, so how would you splat this game? We talked a little about, how would you come up with some actual numbers? How would you come up with a quantity for some of the things we talked about in this game? Again, you're tapping the turtles. Waves come out. What would be something, is there some aspects of this social, is there a social aspect to this game potentially? And if so, how would you measure it? How would you measure a social thing? This is actually one of the harder questions for this game, because people usually connect the two. Anyone? I can also randomly pick someone. Yes?
You could possibly have a scoreboard, seeing other people's results and what their achievements are.
Nice. And would you put everyone up on the same board, like a leaderboard, or would you have different boards?
Probably different boards.
Okay.
You could probably even join some games faction. You can join different types of groups, and whatever kind of scores you have kind of puts you in different things.
And if someone has, let's say they come up with a low score, they're at the bottom end of their faction, they know it because they can see the values. How do you think they would deal with it, and what might you do about that?
I was thinking more of you join the faction and you have a cumulative score. So
Nice.
you see your faction on each of them, so you can only provide, you can never take away from your team.
Yes. You could also require that people have a blended groups, because this happens in sports. It's like, hey, we're going to do a pickup game. How about your team? And then someone gets all of whoever's most experienced and best, they join one team. Partly because they like playing with other people at the same skill level. So I play pool, billiards, snooker, and that's a really common thing. There will be one team that absolutely dominates. They consistently beat everyone else, and there are a whole bunch of teams in the middle, and there's usually one team where people are there just to hang out, and they typically perform the worst. So when you have a blended team, for example, you said every single team has to have someone who has ADHD if they want to disclose. Every single team. But it's a cumulative score for each team or faction or guild or whatever. That's a cool one. I never thought of that one before. Price. What could affect the price of this game? Yes, go ahead.
This is just not thinking about like any like disability.
Hmm.
Like people in other countries that like can't afford like a $20 game, like and getting it to that market and then, like adjusting it to whatever currency is
Yes.
in their country is a lot more preferable for them. And
Yeah, and you can, geofence it too. Has anyone here gotten something into the App Store or Google Play, other than maybe Jeremy? No? So when you go into one of the phones, so iOS includes iPad, when you go into one of these stores and you say, this is the price I'm going to charge, either subscription or single time price or it's free, in-app purchases, they just show you the equivalent price in all of these different countries. It's not all countries in the world, but all these different countries and all these different currencies, and it's equivalent. It starts off as equivalent, but that means someone has a certain purchasing power here will have a different purchasing power, say, in Ghana, right? Or in South Korea, or in Australia, or Japan, or in Russia, or in Ukraine, or in Slovakia, or in England even. You think, oh, it's kind of the same. No, it's different. You can individually adjust the price in every country. But it starts off basically with whatever the current prices are. So, yes, that will take you a day or two. But it's important because if you do it, imagine having, for example, y'all might be younger. Does anyone here use Snapchat? Yeah, it's mostly people who are like 5, 10 years older. But Snapchat, a company named Snap in LA, they earn over $1 billion a quarter. They're like the 6th biggest social media platform on the planet. It's a certain age group that grew up with it. Yes, they're huge. They have the best augmented reality technology right now, period. They make better smart glasses. I've had a pair, 2 pairs actually, and have developed from them. And just from the perspective of the coding and the capabilities and all the little companies they bought to make this, they beat the snot out of Meta and Apple. And they did it a couple years ago. And they're coming out with new glasses next year. Not sure what the price is going to be. But they knew they could make the glasses and sell them for less than the price of a phone. And they're just sort of slightly chunky sunglasses, basically, with waveguides in front, so you can actually display to each eye an image and then create what, to me, as a person with impaired depth, looks completely real. Other people's like, oh, that's different. They also have audio. So, for example, we had a project where we had a bunch of people who were blind, visually impaired test this, and it was largely an audio interface, but some people could see certain colors, or they could see certain shapes and so on. So all of this ran really fast, natively on the glasses, like 3 years ago. And they've been making it better with multiple iterations. So that went off topic a little bit. Price. Let's get back to load. So you're playing Sound Pond, moving a hand around. You're maybe thinking of timing, thinking hand. Kinematic load, which is movement, and cognitive load, which is thinking. How might you measure the load of this game? Pick one or the other, physical or mental. How would you measure that? I would pick the harder one, mental. How would you measure or come up with a number? I'll put it that way. How would you come up with a number for how much mental effort it takes to play this game? Anything that pops in your head is probably correct, because this is very hard to do. All the way in the back, yes.
This is a band-aid solution, but maybe do, for each step of the puzzle by yourselves, add one to like
Yes.
explore?
Yes, that is actually, you are reinventing something, which, by the way, is very hard to do. Congratulations. But there is a system that is now old. It's a little bit out of style called GOMS, which is that. Like, you actually measure just by counting, right? So that is something very few people, like you're the only person who's ever come up with this, by the way. Goals, operators, oh God, what are the other two? Something and something. Very important, that's why I remember it. But this dates back to, I think, the 70s or the 80s, where you wanted to measure how many, you can think of it as how many clicks or taps. And it includes thinking. There are based on real tests of people, like how long does it take to think of the next letter you're going to press on a keyboard? That takes a specific amount of time. How long does it take to think of a goal? That takes a specific amount of time. And you assign all these numbers. And thus you can estimate it. So, for example, there's a difference between, okay, no, I'm not going to do that one. An example by the guy who really popularized this in the 90s, as Raskin, no, that was the son, Jeff Raskin, who was the guy who started the Macintosh project, which then Steve Jobs basically stole from him. And he was the one who popularized a lot of different, like, academic, abstruse subjects. This is one of them. He said, how would you design something to require the least amount of effort, and all it would do would be convert Celsius to Fahrenheit back and forth? And then he worked through the exercise. He'd say, this is how many key presses, this is a click, this is your thinking about it. And the interface that he came up with is one of the coolest things. You just type a number, and it'll automatically display, this is what you're getting if you're converting from Celsius to Fahrenheit. This is what you're getting if that's Fahrenheit and converting to Celsius. So you literally, the only thing you're doing is type number, answer instantly. Right? So GOMS, G-O-M-S, an acronym. That is a way you can estimate this, because otherwise you have to survey, you have to ask people, which is all fine. You can watch them, you can see how long, like give someone instructions, see how long it takes them to say, I get it. So it's hard, but it is doable. And GOMS is the best way that I know to actually come up with a number and estimate it. You have to adapt it, considering that people with certain disabilities may just need longer. So the estimates are based on sighted, hearing people who have full, use of their hands, play video games. Actions. What actions here could you measure? And the measure can be very simple. You look like you were almost raising your hand, even though you weren't. So why don't you go ahead and say something? Actions. Like, how would you measure the accessibility actions, or more specifically, the relative equality of actions in a game, like this, Sound Pond?
I mean, ideally through taps, maybe?
Yeah. How many taps? Because, let's say someone is playing it and they can't actually tap a specific size, or it takes them multiple attempts to tap it. Whereas if you have really good hand-eye coordination and you're sighted, you might be able to tap it. Tap it, tap it. So I grew up playing baseball up to a certain age and stuff like, so I'm actually kind of weirdly good at throwing things and hitting things with things that I throw, because that's just the way I grew up. I'm not going to demonstrate here because it's usually kind of scary, but it's like take things, throw them really fast and hit something that I'm not actually looking straight at. It's only because I did it a gazillion times. So if you count taps, how many times does it take until someone actually taps the thing? What would make it, first you would measure that, and then what would that lead you to do? Because you will find some people who take multiple attempts. So there is a way to make that easier for them, which could be a setting, by the way. You do not need to, you don't need to burn everything into the game. You can have parameters. But if you wanted to decrease the number of taps that it would take for someone to acquire a target, a turtle, how would you do that? There's a very simple thing you can make.
Increase the area.
Yes.
That's responsive.
And who knows what usability law that is? There's a name for it. Fitts law. So Fitts law tells you how long it's going to take to acquire something with either a finger or a mouse pointer or a laser pointer. These all have different constants. You can get a relative measure. You only need the relative measure, F-I-T-T-S apostrophe, and then depending how you feel about it, you can then add another S. But it's Fitts law. You can find it on Wikipedia. That definition is pretty good. But it's one of the reasons that, for instance, what's that?
Make the button bigger.
Make the button bigger. Make it so that someone's moving in that direction. Like if you know what direction they're going to be moving with a hand in, most likely, you make it bigger perpendicular to that, or along the length, so they don't have to stop, because that's the other thing, is you have to stop. Does anyone know the difference between Windows menus and Mac menus? There's a really big difference that's related to Fitts law. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say like the UI is like more rounded with Mac stuff.
Can be, but I've designed rounded Windows interfaces a lot. It's literally dependent on the developer. There's something fundamental to Mac versus OS, which used to be a big thing in the 90s, and it's still true, but people don't talk about it anymore. And it relates to Fitt's law. It has to do with the size of the menu, and it's not pixels. It's the fact that Mac menus occupy the top pixel on the screen. Windows has a title bar. So you actually have to, when you're moving your mouse on Windows, you actually have to stop. And basically none of us are aware of this, those of us who are using mouse pointers. None of us are aware of it because it's this tiny little target. And of course, it's always like, oh, it's Sego, or you pronounce it like 12 point or 10 point. They want to cram more stuff on the screen, so it's like 10 point. It's this tiny little target that's barely bigger than the mouse pointer, right? Mac menus are infinitely tall because they occupy the top pixel. So you can literally take the mouse and throw it, depending on how you feel about your mouse. The mouse pointer will hit the top of the screen, stop, because it could have stopped anywhere along a fake thing that's a foot taller. So it's easier to acquire a menu on the Mac. Individual menu items are different, then it's always the same size. So that is an example where it's just different because you just increase the size, it makes it easier to acquire. It's easier for everyone. Make the turtles as big as you can. Occupy the entire screen. Don't use ornamentation to an extent. You know, that's another thing, is improve accessibility without completely compromising the aesthetics of your game. Because the aesthetics are important. It includes audio aesthetics. And time. What would be an example of a measure of time here? It's the hardest thing to make equal, but it's also one of the easiest things to do. So what kind of time would you measure in Sound Pond? You can just blurt it out. Yes.
I was just gonna say like an actual time.
An actual time?
But you said it for the sounds.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know.
No, that's it. Anyone else? Go ahead.
I guess this kind of goes with what we were talking about a little bit more, but like timing per action.
Yes.
To like see and like measure like which groups are doing better than others.
Yes, and it's just seconds. It's a very easy measure. You don't have to come up with your own term. You don't have to, how many seconds does it take to do this? This applies to, by the way, all 5 of these also apply to board games, card games, any game. You can apply these. Time, how long does it take to read a card? To read, that's a certain amount of time, you get a median. Okay, so Zalika, my friend Zalika, she's one of the power trio, I guess we'll call herself. We'll go around. Accessibility is any barrier between a person's ability to participate in and enjoy an experience. So this expands beyond disability. This is literally just, can you get to a thing? Do you feel comfortable getting to it? Can anyone name any barrier that would prevent you from enjoying something, or someone you know, or someone you're thinking about? Any barrier. You can say whatever you want here, right? Any barrier. What would be another barrier? Go ahead. An actual wall, yes. What would be another barrier to playing a game or enjoying the game? Any sort of game. Let's say there's a game meetup, like here on campus, right? And someone goes to the meetup and they walk in. Let's say they're sighted, and they walk in and they feel uncomfortable. What could that mean?
They're anxious,
They could be anxious. Why are they anxious?
social anxiety.
Why do they have social anxiety? Let's say it's someone that doesn't have social anxiety, but they can still feel this way. This is something that, like, for example, my wife falls in this category.
Okay.
And I'll just give you a leading question. So she'll go somewhere and realize she is the only,
Asian.
that's correct, she's the only Asian in the group, and might be the only woman in the group, and academic and so on. So race is a barrier, because if someone doesn't feel comfortable, it's not the way it should be, but this is the way it is, all right? If that's uncomfortable, how could you make that more comfortable? That's something to think about, all right? If disability is itself a barrier, like someone says, I don't want to be, people will say this, I don't want to be seen, like let's say, disability is, by the way, it's a group you can join at any time. You can find out, like me, a couple years ago, find out I have a disability that I didn't know about, or impairment in my sleep disorder, or you can be in an accident, you could have a condition you don't know about that suddenly pops up, and all of a sudden, you're in this very large minority, you belong to a largest minority in the world, cross barriers, age, all that sort of. Most people eventually will be disabled. By the way, you're also designing for your future selves. Most people will have a disability. Usually comes towards the end of your life. So these are the things to sort of think about. Is any barrier you can think of, it's like, how do you make it the game more accessible? That could be presenting it in someone else's language, in which case don't rely on automatic translation necessarily. Ask someone who speaks Spanish or Swahili or Ukrainian. It's like, do these translations make sense? You know, pay them $1, pay them $5, get them a drink. All right, so we're wrapping up here. There's another section. After this, feel free to leave. You can run away. So this QR code points to a web page on my company website. You can also get this presentation via Jeremy or whatever. So this has references, but all the stuff that we haven't talked about as much as we've talked about. There are video links. There are examples of games. I do include some of the final slides here. And we do have some more time here, but this is where, for example, this book is going to appear. It does not yet. This book, Professor Bryant's book, Game Testing All-in-One, 4th edition. Maybe you can get the 3rd edition cheaply or whatever. This is going to be on that page. So the page dates back to last July, I think. And you can see our friend Matt there. And it's accessible to work with screen readers. But it's this list of, here are games. Here's a place where you can look up these principles, like Fitts law, Hicks law, usability versus flexibility trade-off. I mean, there's a book, Universal Principles Design, which I absolutely love. And it has, I forget if it's 98 or 100 different principles, all explained both for a layperson that is a non-designer or non-gamer for that matter, and for someone who's really into it and wants to say, oh, you know, here's an actual academic reference. Like, here's a paper on the subject written, or here's the pivotal thing that, you know, here's a paper that Fitts wrote on this subject, which I think late 50s or in the 60s. So QR code will take you to the website, echobatix.com. You can go to the website or whatever, and it's just a long list of things with the formatting that unfortunately WordPress forced me into, which doesn't always work. So there's that QR code. Okay. I didn't necessarily get permission from all these people that we've done this with. Kind of. Staple Bricks for the Blind, Winnicott, so the top two on the right. So Staple is Chris Nicholas over here. Chris, you want to wave your hand? So running Independent Media Expo every year, now at St. Edward's University. Here, the school you go to if you go here. Worcester Polytechnic Institute is in the middle of Massachusetts. That's where I've given this talk before to a student group similar to yourselves. Austin Books and Comics. I'm tenuous relation, but we all know the guy who owns it. And he is literally, the fact that there are all these connections that we have through this one store led in part to this, right? Boston Game Dev, that's my local group that I belong to. Game Loop Boston is a game development conference where everybody gets together and you actually vote on what you want to talk about, which is a really interesting way. Omar's World of Comics is an awesome comics shop in Lexington, Mass. If you've heard of Lexington, like historic Lexington, Battle of Lexington. Stonemeyer Games, maker of many fine games. I have a reference later to that, which we may or may not get to. Because again, formally the presentation is over. Feel free to go about your day or evening. But there is a reference here, particularly to Stonemeyer Games. It has to do with board games. Because I interviewed, like there's on YouTube, it's over an hour long. So if you could tolerate even another 5 minutes of me ever in your life, you can watch this interview that Jamie Stegmeyer, the co-founder of Stonemeyer Games, made Wingspan and Scythe and a bunch of other games, interviewed me talking about the vision friendliness or non-friendliness of 10 different board games. Perkins School for the Blind, that's where Helen Keller went to school. That's within 20 minutes of where I live. Lindsay and I have been there to the incredibly cool Textile Museum. There's all kinds of fun things. Museum of Science, which is quite a nice museum, especially because it got a $50 million donation from Michael Bloomberg, because he grew up going to the Museum of Science. He was like, hey, here's $50 million. Snap's coming to make Snapchat, if you use their stuff, and Kamikaze is another comic book store in Boston, like within walking distance of me. And that was the first place that a friend Matthew, and I gave this. We actually covered, so imagine this was just about video games. We tried to cover all types of games in an hour. And it kind of almost worked.
Was Bop It on that list?
Bop It was not on the list.
Do you know how much blind people love Bop It?
I do not know.
Okay.
I know exactly how much because you told me before.
Oh, okay, yeah, it's a thing.
Yeah. So to close things out here, because we're getting close to time, and again, sleep thing, I'll stick around a little longer, but feel free to split if you want. You can vote on a final topic. Augmented reality, board games, card games, or the design process? Yes.
I will say board games.
Okay. Anyone else have any vote? Once? Twice? Board games. Okay, board games. So I also have dice here. By the way, someone made it. I will point out that someone made an augmented reality game in which people in wheelchairs, the students, could play essentially soccer with people who are not in wheelchairs. And the test, the equitable experience, is the parents of the students in wheelchairs cried with joy when one of their kids could play with the other kid soccer. So, board games. Dragon Soul is a game by Sebastian Baberstam, who is a professional cellist in Boston, and decided he wanted to make a game. And it's a Catan-like board where you have dragons and knights and archers, if I remember correctly, and castles. But the thing that was interesting, what Sebastian did, and this is playtesting, like I sat down to playtest this game at this indie game developer meetup in Lexington at Omar's House of Games, is that he was really open to talking about any aspect of his game. And I said, well, right now your game is inaccessible to people who are colorblind. 10% of all people born as men are colorblind. 10%. Born as women, 2, roughly. So he had green and red. So it's a little hard to see, but by the way, these are realistic conditions where it's dark. Usually games are not well illuminated. So there were these castles, and there was a green one and a red one. Now granted, this was after actually he changed the castle design. Originally it was just they were only differentiable by color. Never ever differentiate something only by color. It's literally the worst way or the last way to differentiate them. So he changed the shape, but this, for the sighted members of the audience, this is what roughly this looks like to someone who's red-green colorblind. These two colors look the same. So it's harder to distinguish. Someone might get used to distinguishing the shapes, probably not. A lot of games have 4-color combo, and it used to be, especially up through the 50s, 60s, 70s, into the 80s, and even into the 90s, that it was always the same 4 colors. There'd be like blue, red, yellow, and green. People can't tell the difference between red and green a lot of times. So he changed the colors. By the way, and then, so this last image, this is where it's black and white. If you can't tell the difference between pieces when they're black and white, that is also a kind of inaccessibility because the shapes should be different. And he did change the shapes. There are numbers. The dragons are very hard to see because they're very complicated. So another thing that Sebastian did is he actually brailled this within like a day or two. And so our friend Matthew, you see here, went back and played the game, was able to play the game because the cards or these pieces were brailled, but at a Catan board, so he still had difficulty figuring out where are all the pieces, where they go. Just imagine it's a gameplay board, right? So that's an example where something can be brailled, but then whether you should or not is another thing. It might be better to literally make an app to read the board and describe it to somebody than brailing brailing is expensive, by the way.
On that piece,
Yeah.
is that pushed in? Is the braille popping out the?
Yeah, you braille from one side and it pushes out the other side.
Okay, so
See-
that makes sense. I hadn't thought about that you would braille
Yes.
the back side because you're holding
Yes.
it facing it.
Yes. So when you braille something,
Ergonomics.
you braille it backwards,
Yeah.
which is not easy to learn.
I used to cheat with braille card, like playing cards sometimes,
Yeah.
because you could sometimes feel the braille in the back, but.
Yes. Yeah, so this, let's see, I'm not even going to try, my braille is off. So he just, that's not even say yes, that was another thing. So he would braille just enough, it has to be just enough to be distinguishable. You don't have to braille the whole word because braille words tend to be kind of long. Braille is a very specific size. It's standardized for all of the English-speaking world, Unified English Braille. And then there are for kinds, so there's a whole bunch of things. But brailing is expensive. If you want to make some people who are blind really happy, yes, braille your stuff. Because also there's like, there's this new braille, and you might get a pretty large percentage of people who can read braille.
That was my talk to my students today.
Yeah.
If you can find a niche group
Yes.
and satisfy them, they will all buy your game. Or
Yes.
A large percentage.
Yes.
Or if you just don't want to mess with technology as in playing your game, like you just want it to be, or if there's some degree of privacy, like if you're playing a card game, for instance, and the idea is for other people, there's something, a game where others are not supposed to see what you're seeing, you have to
and I follow up with Wendy said, I almost hate to bring it up, but every design choice you make, even if it's an improvement, and then you get like one or two more after. And it keeps going. I still think about problems that I tried to solve or solved 25, 30 years ago, and it still bothers me sometimes.
To your SPLAT discussion earlier, I don't think it had occurred to me that improving on one metric might add to load.
That's right.
Yep.
Yes.
Because I
Good
was
point.
just thinking here that like, well, so we'll put the phone describing it because that's going to make it, okay, well now you got to have a headset in.
Yeah.
Now you also have to listen to the other players in the headset. Well, cool. Now I'm working mentally harder than everyone at the board.
Yes.
And maybe my strategy sucks now.
And then it's just like, maybe I don't want to, maybe this isn't fun. Maybe it's,
Yeah.
if it's more like a BORED game,
Yeah.
then, you know.
Yeah. So I will jump ahead to include something for the card games because it's relevant because cards are used in board games. Is that there's this game, Dungeon Mayhem, which is sort of like an easy entry point for people who want to get into role-playing games, like Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Morkborg, whatever. So Dungeon Mayhem is a card game, all right, and there's an app that works with Dungeon Mayhem. Like, to this point, it's like, so now there's a way to make it accessible. There's a guy from Iceland who made this game, you know, relatively new iOS programmer, all this kind of stuff. And this is our example with time. So if Lindsay had these cards, I didn't bring them with me, and if it's what we call ink print, so print that's actually printed on the page with ink, so not something that Lindsay as a Braille reader is going to read, the time for her to read the ink print alone, or Matt, because we did this live demonstration in front of an audience, is infinite. They'll never read it on their own. If they then use this app, which is called Retinade, by the way, always check the name of your game against other categories because Retin A is also a medication. So harder to market your game when it very much the name resembles another very, very popular thing in which a lot of money has been poured. But the Retinade app, now he could use that app to read this card. This is a card. Matt is totally blind. What problem could he encounter using an app to read a card? I'm sorry? Yeah, there is. That was actually a pain for him to do. But let's say the app is open, it's running. He's got the app in one hand, which, by the way, there's also kinematic load here. He's got the app in one hand. He's got the card in the other hand. He's going to encounter another problem. Yep. Which the way it was done was not great. Let's say it's lined up and he's got the right distance. Then what's the problem? This is less obvious to people who are sighted.
But it's reading it to him out loud.
Yeah.
The other players know what cards he has.
There is that. There is that. Let's say it's an open game, though. You have cards. So Matt doesn't know what the orientation should be. He doesn't know up, down, front, back. So he will read, half the time he will read the back side. And when he has the front side, half the time it'll be upside down. So the game, remember, isn't configured to read that way. You have to actually configure OCR to do that. So eventually he'll get it. So we timed it. It took him like 15 seconds to read a card.
Also, you have to make sure other people can't see it as you're lining. Like, you know, if you have a card and you're playing with people,
Yeah.
and you're kind of having to hold it away, you know, this distance away from the phone and blah, blah, blah. Like, part of it is like, I'm not always 100% sure if someone else might be able to see it,
Right.
you know?
So there's definitely, especially if it's secret card game versus open card game, that's a consideration. So what we did is we clipped one of the corners of the card. This is actually a different card. So then Matt was able to read it in 2 seconds, just by clipping the corners. Right? I actually had my scissors. I don't think I did it there, but I just handed the cards like, read this. And actually, he didn't know what card it was. It was just read it. And it started reading all this. So this is a card that has a bunch of text on it. Mighty powers, block 1 damage, draw a card, blah, blah, blah. And it was Braille, then Matt reads it in about a second. Like just long enough for anybody to read. Braille reading and sighted reading is very similar speeds. They're comparable. It's the best you're going to do for a Braille reader. So this is an example of the time metric. But to go back to board games briefly, the last thing I'll mention is, I don't know if you've heard of these games, but these are the games that, there's Jamie Stegmeyer, this smiley dude, and this is the name of the video. It's linked from the page to which I have the QR code. Azul, Dune Imperium, King of Tokyo, Nyctophobia, which I'll explain why it's shown differently. Parks, which is an absolutely gorgeous game, where it's a little bear cub in front of this cartoony look of, I think that's Yellowstone. Skull, which is a card game. Splendor, which is a very visually busy game, The Crew, which is a space card game, Seven Wonders, and Wingspan, my favorite. I contributed to the vision-friendly card set. I said, oh, change this, do this, move this here, make this bigger, increase the contrast. There was another guy, another unpaid consultant / helper, who also contributed to it. So the first, I would consider major game publisher that I knew of board games that actually created an entire separate set for accessibility within a couple of years of the original game Wingspan coming out. Game is still very popular. It was Game of the Year, Spiel des Jahres in Germany. So anyway, so this is an hour and 1 minute of the two of us talking. Sometimes going kind of deep, like here's how you would measure how visually busy something is. One of the leading causes of blindness is cortical visual impairment, and there are people whose vision actually varies throughout the day sometimes. It can go from total blindness to seeing pretty well, and if they get a visually busy scene in front of them, their vision will actually start to decrease. It's complicated. So if the game is visually busy, it's actually worse for everybody. And then you have the people it affects the most, and if you design for them, you're actually making it better. So simplifying designs is often a good idea. If you have ornamentation, put it somewhere where it's not going to affect the ability to read the card or read the board game or read text or whatever it is. Is keep the ornamentation somewhere where it's merely ornamental, not interfering. So, and there are other topics which we won't go into, like design process. Where do you actually design? It's not in the traditional thing, like where do you think of accessibility? You actually have to study it before you even conceive the game, right? So testing, play testing comes along. There's a book on that. There'll be books on game development. There aren't really books on accessibility and game development that I know of. So you'll have to piece this stuff together, frankly, which is exciting. Because that means you're at the beginning. Yeah. So anyways, thank you so much.
Gary,
Good questions?
one thing you said earlier that is
Yes.
one of my favorite things that you say in lectures and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't mean to get it wrong. That accessibility is
Extreme usability.
That and you're designing for yourself later, I think are two things that really struck me the first time that you ever said them.
Yeah.
That this isn't for that niche market that you're going to get to come play your game, or like this isn't going after some small market segment. This helps every single person playing your game enjoy it more.
Yeah.
Every single person. And I don't think I'd ever, I was in the middle of having to argue with the place I work about whether our webpage was very readable, and it was really great to present that as like, no, this is for everyone. Stop thinking of it as a percentage of the population.
Yeah.
Also, my eyes have been fantastic my entire life and are now not. So, you're getting older, and I don't care if none of this has ever applied to you, it suddenly will.
Yes.
On top of that, one of the first things from an occupational therapy school is we're not able-bodied people, we're tags. We're temporarily able-bodied people because eventually we'll get this. That's the word we use, tags. So everyone's a tag until you become differently able.
Yeah. Because when you're young, same thing. You're not able to do things. And we enjoy this as like, oh, I remember what it was like to be young and you're doing this. It's like, yeah, I remember living here 25 years ago, 20 years ago. A little older feeling now. Older ones of us in the audience too is like, oh, you definitely notice something will hit you. I know a lot of people in their 40s who all of a sudden find out I can't eat this thing anymore ever. Milk, for example. I can take stuff with it, but it's a family thing. Something hits you. And do you still want to be playing video games then? Yeah, so think of that. And if you're a programmer, you also, the first person you're developing who's going to assume responsibility for your future code is the future self who has forgotten every single line. So you have to document it. But that's another example. You are designing for other people, but you do include yourself, because we often do design something the way we want it. Other comments, thoughts? I think it would. I think some people would find it really, insulting, especially if they have, a turtle farm or something, or whatever people do with turtles. I don't even know. It's like an ant farm, but for turtles. Seems big.
Odd question. I played no video games. Sorry. The last video game I played was in a dorm.
Get out.
Yeah.
Is there any reason why there's three turtles? Could there just be one big button in the bottom corner? It's the same timing.
Oh, just timing. No reason whatsoever. In fact,
timing's the satisfying part of that game.
yeah.
If the waves were different colors and made a noise and made a haptic feeling when they hit the target, you wouldn't need.
Equitable experience means it just does something that everyone
just
can.
try to make a corresponding.
Yeah. So the other expansion of the game is you add more turtles, you make them smaller, you move them around. You might have to hit them in a certain order to have the notes come in a certain order. And again, so there's all sorts of things that you could do to change the game. You can make it the interaction. We're talking about the interaction, so there's interaction design. You can make the interaction simpler, and it's not really going to leave much. And that could be a setting. A lot of people. One thing I'll say is something that we've heard a number of people ask for is they want to be able to play a game at 80% speed. Because if they can play at 80% speed, they can play the whole thing. At full speed, they can't play it. They won't play it. They won't buy it if they try it somewhere else. So speed control will make games accessible to the huge population of people who have some limited mobility or some limitation relative to the rest of the population in terms of planning, motion or being able to control their arm or hand or whatever.
Thank you.
Thank you.